Hi there. My name is Lucas Wees, and I am the host of the Weesesports Quarantine Chronicles. For today's episode, I'm joined by Alex Feuz. Alex is a play-by-play broadcaster for the Burlington Royals baseball team, a minor league affiliate of the MLB's Kansas City Royals. In this episode, I chat with Alex about his early days calling baseball games, how he gets high-profile guests to come on his podcast, and advice for aspiring broadcasters and journalists. As always, the Weesports Quarantine Chronicles is on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. So make sure to like, watch, rate, and subscribe to all those three channels. This is episode 18 of the Weesports Quarantine Chronicles. All right, for today's episode of the Weesports Quarantine Chronicles, I am joined by Alex Feuz. He is the play-by-play broadcaster for the Burlington Royals, a minor league affiliate of the MLB's Kansas City Royals. Alex, welcome to the Weesports Quarantine Chronicles. How are you?
Good, Lucas. Thank you for having me. I know as we were talking beforehand, we started where we hope to have baseball soon. I know I tweeted yesterday, I hope to have baseball back very soon, but safely. So again, whatever baseball looks like in 2020, I'm here for it. I have waken up a little bit earlier in recent days because I got to get my baseball fixed by watching the KBO. So it's been, I would say, an improvement of no baseball in my normal routine than the last couple of days. Has been nice, refreshing to have some form of baseball in my life.
So are you staying up till 1 a.m, or are you getting up at like 5 a.m?
You know, the first night, my favorite thing to do that I didn't know was my favorite thing to do in the summertime until, it's funny, Lucas, you don't realize how much you miss something until it's actually gone. And, you can always tell how much you miss baseball in the off season, but when it's your routine, right, from when spring training starts, mid-February up until baseball goes until the end of October, that's your time for baseball. And right now, my birthday was last weekend. This was the first year that we didn't have the MLB. Now, it just so happens the KBO kicked off, or I guess you could say through the first pitch on May 5th. So I actually did have some form of baseball on my birthday. So on that day, I did stay up till 1:30 in the morning. That there was actually a rain delay, but I was able to fall asleep with baseball in the background. And that is something I didn't know I loved until it was gone. And then last week it was nice, but I had been waking up early. And I had a radio show at Dean I still do, in the fall semester and the spring semester. And it was Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. to 8 a.m. radio show. So every morning I would get up around 4:30 in the morning. Now, since this whole quarantine process and me not being at school, I've kind of gotten away from that routine. So getting back to the early morning routine is actually kind of nice. And it's nice waking up to watch live baseball. Again, whatever form we get baseball, I'm happy and content with.
Well, first of all, happy belated birthday and all the best for the year ahead. And yeah, I mean, I've been the same way. I mean, quarantine hit Canadian society in the middle of March. It affected my graduate sports journalism program. I'm assuming that you're doing the same thing with Zoom calls and using technology for classes. But I definitely find that getting up early in the morning, doing reading, and staying in that routine is so critical for a young journalist during these days where there's not much going on right now. And luckily, as you said, there's some baseball, and here's hoping that baseball can get back to playing very soon.
100%. You said it best.
So, Alex, I wanted to bring you on because you've had a fantastic broadcasting career for such a young age. You're only a sophomore at Dean College in Massachusetts. And I wanted to start off by asking, what got you into sports broadcasting and why do you want to pursue this as a career?
I would say I have had a different career path than some of my friends that are doing this, or if you talk to any major league broadcaster, in the sense that I have the same passion that they all do and the love for it, but I actually did not care at all for sports until I was 13 years old.
Mm.
And I know you ask a lot of these people that work in the sports industry. I grew up watching baseball. Now, I will say I did play Little League for 3, 4 years. And if you ask my father, he would tell you that it was painful for me to play baseball. And I look back and I say, maybe I wish I stuck with it a little bit more. I fell in love with the game of baseball in particular when I was 13 years old. I was grounded for 2 weeks, Lucas, and I couldn't watch any TV. Now I'm currently in upstate New York, and I grew up here, and so I couldn't watch any TV for the 2 weeks. So I turned on my radio, and I was flipping through the channels on my radio, and I started listening to John Sterling and Susan Waldman, the John Sterling, the voice, and Susan, the voice of the New York Yankees, call baseball. And it was at that moment that I had a love for listening to how John Sterling and Susan call their games. And the way John Sterling brings the entertainment factor to it made me attracted to the broadcasting style. And it's a performance at the end of the day, right? It's a performance every single night by telling stories, by informing an audience. And that's why I love radio in particular, because you have to paint the canvas, right? I mean, it's an overused phrase, but you have nothing but your voice. And that attracted me to broadcasting. And then just the love for baseball. And then it kind of transpired into, okay, now baseball is over with. What's the next season? And so then you get into football and then basketball and hockey. So then you kind of get all interconnected with being a sports fan. So I guess I should thank my parents for grounding me for 2 weeks, because I've been incredibly grateful, like you have said, I'm truly blessed with the fact that, the first week of June will be 6 years since I started my own podcast. And it's been an incredible journey.
Well, we're going to get into your podcast just a little later in the show, but I wanted to get back to your love of baseball. And I find that here in Canada, and I know that for me, I was experienced to this, is hockey growing up. Whether you play hockey on your parents' pond or you play shinny with your friends or, following junior hockey, American Hockey League, the NHL. I feel like that's the same, though, for baseball in the U.S. Did you feel that American pastime love for the game of baseball growing up?
Yeah, I definitely feel like, especially where I am in upstate New York, where baseball is really an interesting sport, right? Because it's not like we're in Arizona or California or Florida, where in theory you could play baseball 365 days a year. Now, obviously, you can be, if you're a pitcher, you can find out gyms and you can set up a mound or hitting cages and you can play in there. But baseball is kind of a niche market in New York, especially in upstate in the area, very close to Canada.
Mm-hmm.
And, the same way, it's tough to play baseball in the wintertime in Canada. But I would say definitely baseball here, there's a love for it, and you have to be able to find out, what really got me into the love of baseball from a different perspective. Sure, I listened to baseball games, and I've listened to so many Yankee games that were called by John Sterling. I grew up a Yankee fan since I started listening to him call games, and Susan as well. But throughout high school, I was a team manager of my high school baseball team. And I was able to be a part of something that's bigger than myself, right? And be a part of a team. And I went to every single practice. I went to every single game. I took the stats. I wrote articles, sent them to the newspapers, and got the scores reported. So I was a part, even throughout the offseason. I would still go to all the offseason workouts. And I had a great relationship with the coach, Coach Tita, there as well. And that's where I really learned about the strategy of the game, but also an appreciation for the love that not the players or excuse me, not the coaches or that I had or the fans that were there in attendance, but the appreciation and love for the game that the players had for it. And the amount of work that they went into just to play high school baseball, JV and varsity baseball was extraordinary. And to be able to create the relationships with the teammates on our high school teams, but also relationship with the players in, as we call it, the 518, the upstate New York region, to meet these players that, just have the same interest in the same game of loving baseball.
So you talked about learning the strategy of the game, forming those relationships with coaches and players, and really developing that appreciation and love for the game beyond what you experienced watching Yankee games or listening to baseball games growing up. So when you became the play-by-play broadcaster for the New Bedford Bay Sox, how did you integrate that knowledge of the game that you learned back in high school into your broadcasting, and did it make it an easier transition for you?
I think the biggest part, it's a good question, right? Because before I really started play-by-play last summer for the Bay Sox, I called a couple games at Dean, right? And I've had experience with interviews, on my podcast throughout the years. But when it comes to play-by-play for baseball, where there's maybe one or two cameras set up, mostly one, it's not too good quality of the cameras for the NACBL last season. I know they launched this whole brand new thing that was supposed to happen until COVID-19 kind of halted baseball and sports as a whole. But so radio, right? That was the audio of the baseball games. That was the biggest aspect last summer, where you couldn't really rely and go back to kind of just using the picture of the baseball. So you kind of had to call every single game as if you were broadcasting on the radio, even though, yes, some people may be watching with video. So getting, into that, I would say the first couple of weeks of the season, it was a struggle because at the end of the day, I think it goes for everyone. You don't want to fail with anything that you're doing. And I feel like, I was failing a lot, and it took me a while to find this groove and this, just to, you talk to any of the broadcasters, and when they first start out, you have to fail to get better.
Mm-hmm.
And being, in the know of, okay, I don't like how I said that. I feel like I'm saying the same thing over and over and over again. If it's a ground ball to the shortstop, so-and-so hits a ground ball to the shortstop, he throws over to first. But you're saying that every single time that same play happens. And sometimes you feel like, okay, it's a ground ball to the shortstop. Shortstop comes in on the play and makes a throw over to first to get the out. How can I say, if it's the same exact play, how can I call that same play but differently every single time for myself and the listeners to not be, okay, it's the same thing. He's saying the same words, using the 10, words out of his vocabulary to describe the same play. So that was more of a challenge for me, was simply not having the experience that I felt I needed to feel confident enough at the beginning. Now, halfway through the season, I was finally able to break through that and to start having more fun by doing it. Obviously, I was having fun all the time, but you start having more appreciation of your own work and having more fun by just feeling more confident and ready that you are putting out work that is credible and that you feel comfortable with listening back to. So I think that was kind of the biggest aspect of calling baseball in New Bedford last summer. I have a great relationship with every single player on that team still. I still talk to a bunch of them almost every single day. So last summer was definitely one of my best experiences so far in my career.
You mentioned about failure, and you described a lot about self-critique, which I think a lot of young broadcasters are hesitant to do, but it needs to be done in order to get better. I know I experienced that calling hockey, and I was at first a little hesitant to figure out, okay, I don't like maybe the sound of my own voice calling the game. I don't want to listen, but it's so critical if you want to become a better broadcaster to listen to what you've done. And like you said, figure out different ways to say a certain play, because then it just allows you to be a more polished broadcaster.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing I find with baseball too, Alex, it's difficult is it's a slower game. And not only are you calling the game, but you need to have antidotes in your back pocket and need to do a lot of that prep before the game so that you're not just on dead air, if you will, just calling the game and not providing that helpful context. Because in hockey, it's so fast paced that you can call the game and there's not a lot of break in between to add that filler information. Baseball, you have to.
100%. And I give so much credit. What the NACBL does, for anyone that's not aware, so each team has one broadcaster, right, that calls the play-by-play. Some teams have two. Some do, like, they'll split the work in half, do games throughout the season. I think it's like a 44, 45 game schedule. They'll do like 23 games and the other person will do the other 23, let's say that. So most teams only have one broadcaster. And I guess I should say every team that's playing, there's only one broadcaster for each game. So no matter what, it's only two broadcasters total calling the game. But there's also only one broadcast. So for, let's say it's the Bay Sox playing the Newport Gulls. So I was the Bay Sox broadcaster, and I was broadcasting the game with the Newport Gulls broadcaster. So we would kind of play off each other. And every single broadcaster in the NACBL last summer was so fun to work with. And it's what I miss most about not having sports isn't the games at the end of the day. It's the people that come along with it. I miss just building those relationships and having fun with the people that are working behind the scenes. That's what I miss most right now is the people. And I, loved calling all the baseball games with all the broadcasters that we all had the same appreciation, right? We all loved baseball. We all loved broadcasting. And that was kind of to fill that void, like you're saying, where it's a conversation. At first, it was a challenge because I knew no one that was a broadcaster before starting last summer. So it can be a little daunting of a task to ask someone to have a conversation with someone live on the radio or on, the streaming service, that you're having a conversation with someone for 3, 4, 5 hours that you've never met in your life. And you could know no one that's listening to it. No one that is listening might know you. So you are listening to a conversation with two people that never met each other before that game, but you have to be able to kind of get through that and to kind of build chemistry with each other on the fly. Obviously, it takes time to build chemistry, and I feel like halfway through the season, when you've worked with those past broadcasters, if you're playing a team within your own division, you face each other 6 times. So when it came to Newport, we played each other 6 times. And I'm best friends with the Newport broadcaster now. And when you have a conversation with someone 6 times that lasts, 5, 6, 7 hours, and you're spending a whole day with them, you're kind of in that predicament where you have to get along with them and you have to create some kind of conversation, whether it's on the air or off the air, because you're calling 6 baseball games for however long the game lasts for. So it's kind of up to, the broadcasters at the end of the day to not create that void over the air. And at the end of the day, if it's striking up a conversation about what you want to see either in the NACBL or at the major league level with rules, or just conversations, fun conversations about a song that's playing on in the background that somewhat relates to what's happening on the field, do it. It's a long season. It's a grind. While it's only 45 games, it's the comparison of 162. It's still a lot of games. It's a lot of time on the air. You have to figure out something on how to talk and still how to entertain your audience.
No, that's a very fair point. And chemistry is something that any broadcaster trying to develop it's challenging, but it's so important. And props to you for doing it so quickly with someone, that you just met, because that's very challenging. But I wanted to go back to your comment about people. And it really resonated with me because I did commentary play-by-play for the Stouffville Spirit in the Ontario Junior Hockey League. Very similar to the league for baseball that New Bedford is in. It's very local. It's very, it's junior hockey. And to me, what I found as a broadcaster is, broadcasting in front of those fans and on radio and on digital TV is like, you're treated as a god almost because you're the only broadcaster or media person that's willing to pay attention and raise awareness about this team. I'm just curious if you found that with the people that you built connections with at New Bedford, just appreciating you because you're spending your time getting your reps being the broadcaster for the team, and on the flip side, the fans are getting a treat to see their team being broadcasted.
It's a good note, right, where, what's best right now, and I'm sure you've experienced this too, Vince Scully once said when he realized it was time to hang it up was when people were calling him Mr. Scully. And at the end of his career, he was not really spending too much time with the players. I mean, he didn't have to. He's the best broadcaster in baseball. But the point is, right now, in our times, in our careers, we're the same age as these players, right? And that's a huge advantage. You're not someone that's obviously sometimes, in some cases, you can have some street cred as a broadcaster if you're, if you have experience in the field. But at the end of the day, what someone kind of can compare it to, college broadcaster in the NACBL, a college baseball player in the NACBL, same goals, right? You want to get eventually to the minor leagues and then eventually hope at a shot to call major league games. One's in a broadcast booth, one's on the field. It's the same aspect and the same mindset that you can bring to it, but it's also at the same day, completely different. I'm not trying to, hit a home run or to hit, a single to walk off the game that would eventually, create a team to go on into the playoffs, but still it's the same mindset, right? We also have the same goal to have some sort of success in our own respective careers. But to your point about the people aspect, it's huge because you can tell their stories, right? And it's up to the broadcasters on any different front that it's up to the people to tell their own stories. And in some cases, the players, it's tough, right? Unless you have, if the players have their own outlet that they can tell their own stories with or to. But for myself, I could tell their own stories over the broadcast, over the radio broadcast if they wanted to share it. But also you have to figure out that within the first week, you're not going to get every single player on that team walking up to you and telling their life stories to you. You have to build the trust with them that they can go to you, even if it's a story where you can put on the air or not, to where you're talking about relative things in their own lives, whether it be an injury, maybe them not just feeling that well, but just to have some basic knowledge of who they are as people, right? So you have to build that trust with them, but it's also they can go to you if they say, yeah, my mom's birthday is tonight. Is there any way you could try to work that in the broadcast? I've been thinking about her. It's my first time away from home. Something along the lines of that capacity to where they can kind of go to you to trust you. Now, also, there's another aspect. I had a great relationship with the team's beat writer that wrote for the local newspaper. At that time, I felt like my writing skills could not really, almost like my broadcasting skills at the beginning of the season, where I did not feel confident enough that I could tell the story in my writing capacity. So I would go up to the local writer and I would say, this person, he told me this. I can say it on the broadcast, but also I want it in a written form because it's an incredible story. And he has spent over 40, 50 years in the business. And he was one of the best writers I've ever read. And he was incredible. So I'm like, you have to interview this player and tell their own story in your words because I can't do it to the best of my ability for where I feel confident enough in the story. So there's also that concept too, where you have to figure out, all right, can I tell these people's and players stories to where they can be relatable as people.
Speaking about chatting with people and telling stories, you host a podcast, the Whole Story podcast. And I wanted to dive deeper into this because you brought on some very high profile guests. From Ken Rosenthal to Bob Costas, Andrew McCutcheon, Adam Schefter, Ian Rappaport. You've chatted with a lot of top sports personalities. And I find that for young people, it's so easy now for up and coming journalists to create a podcast. But I think the flip side of that is that the podcast space has become so saturated that it's very hard at first to get eyeballs on your content. You may produce some great content, but if you're not doing the social media strategy to get a lot of eyeballs on your content, then it just falls flat. And you've been someone at such a young age to build a really good following through your podcast. So I'm just curious, were there challenges when starting the podcast to get eyeballs on your stuff? Did the guests help increase your numbers? And were there any strategies that you could relay to the listeners that are looking to start a podcast in order to build that following?
You know, it's just starting out, right? The last couple of months when, like I said earlier, I've had a podcast. It will be 6 years this June. And a lot of times some people might follow me, or new followers in the last couple of months. I know a lot of people that haven't followed me are now following the Whole Story podcast. And when you see sometimes an interview with Ken Rosenthal or like Bob Costas where, whoa, how did, he get this interview? And I tell everyone, anyone can do what I did better, right? And it's all about sending emails, building relationships, right? It's all of the above. But what a lot of times people don't realize is, Ken and I interviewed Ken the first time over 4 years ago. Mm-hmm. And so Ken and I have that relationship, right? Where I've interviewed him probably 6, 7, 8 times, something along the lines of that. So someone that might be a new listener to the Whole Story podcast that, whoa, you got Ken Rosenthal. Well, it's hard to explain, right, Lucas? But, I interviewed Bob a couple months back. I met him back in November. He was inducted into this New York State Baseball Hall of Fame, and I met him there, and we've stayed in contact. And, I've interviewed him 2 times on my podcast now. And I know Adam Schefter was on last year, and I'm actually interviewing him. When this airs, it will be last week, so you can go back and listen to that interview with him. But still, it's, just meeting them as people, and look, they were in our position, whether it be 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago, right, Lucas, where they were aspiring, had a love for broadcasting or baseball or sports in general. So if you can somehow relate yourself to them in some way, chances are, especially right now, where they're just kind of sitting home, and now Ken, respectively, is still working every single day on. But in some cases, if you're a major league broadcaster, you're not really that busy right now in terms of if you would be. So it's all about just building relationships, but also, the best compliment I can get is not getting someone on the first time. It's the second or the third. And, I would say I take pride in my interviews, but also I take pride in just keeping them and relating them as people and treating them as if they're not some celebrity, right? Because they get that all the time. When the biggest eye-opening experience I had was when I was tasked to kind of keep Bob intact at the Hall of Fame, and I was able to sit with him at dinner and stuff like that. And when the ceremony was over with, I had to walk him back to his car. And I had to kind of be on the left of him. He was on my right, and we went like kind of against the wall, avoiding as many people as possible. But people were coming up to him asking for autographs in between induction speeches, where I've never experienced meeting someone from a broadcasting standpoint to where obviously you've been around broadcasters that are somewhat notable and people are asking autographs for him. That was an eye-opening experience. So somehow finding a way to just treat them as a regular person is huge, because at the end of the day, they're just people with a cool job. And I think that's the biggest key, right? Because if you treat them as that and not as, someone that's a higher, stature of, oh my gosh, can I have your autograph? No, no, because it's all about respectiveness. Just like if you're talking with a Major League Baseball player, right? It's also another big thing about talking with an MLB player is trying to strike up a conversation of something other than baseball, right? Because that's a great tip for someone that's just getting into this or a podcast, into a podcast. If you can somehow relate to them of something other than baseball, you know how many people go up to them every single day, 24/7, 365 days a year, and want to have a conversation about baseball. But if you can find something that you have in common with them that's not baseball, I mean, it's like if you work at McDonald's, right? Do you want McDonald's for dinner, breakfast, and lunch? So if you could go and get a salad somewhere, I think that would be a better appetite, right? And you might be more attracted to go eat a salad more often than eating McDonald's 3 times a day. It's a different way to look at it, but it's the same concept. And I think, a lot of times, creating a podcast can be challenging to get to the other part of this question. And, someone asked me about last week, what's the end goal? What do you want? And, if it comes to play-by-play broadcasting, I would be happy with that. If it comes to doing podcasts or interviews, I would be happy with that. But I would love to be a part of a brand that's bigger than myself, because like you said, it is challenging, because the last 6 years up until really I started with the Royals, where the content I was putting out has been through myself, right? Or any guest that I interview. So it has been challenging at times to, how can I get new followers if it's just myself putting it out there? Or, if I'm lucky enough to have someone share it, a guest to share it, then that helps. So it's all about just how can I make relatable content? And like you said, everyone has a podcast. Now, I always joke, the man on the side of the street has a podcast. So there's so much content out there. So how can I make it, why should I listen to this podcast? And if you can somehow find a way to hit that market, own that market, be aware of what other people are doing in that market. How can I be better than them? What are they doing that I like that I'm not doing? That's a big piece not a lot of people do. You have to appreciate other people's work. Don't steal it. But how can I enjoy, let's say it's on a TV show, right? I like how this TV show is doing it. How can I attribute somewhat of a likeness to my own TV show? It's the same way. So I think that's a bigger aspect of it that not a lot of people realize in the grand scheme of things.
Well, absolutely. And I think especially now during the pandemic, where there is no sports going on and a lot of people are trying to figure out, well, what am I going to do with my time? I think now is the perfect time to really hone in on your journalistic skills that you've developed, but also keep in mind of the trends that are happening right now. Journalism is changing forever as a result of this pandemic. And I think that the people that come out of this pandemic, like yourself, that are have a brand, have marketable skills, have employable skills, but are also a little bit ahead of the curve in terms of where journalism is going, I think they're going to be the ones that are going to be successful down the road, especially when they work in this industry. Because I definitely agree, it's difficult. and it can feel difficult now, given that a lot of organizations are cutting people, and budgets are reducing, so it's not the greatest. But if you have more skills in the toolbox as a journalist, it's just going to make you more marketable down the road.
100%. And as a broadcaster, I had this conversation with Jessica Kleinsmith on the Whole Story podcast back in January. And, I asked her where, as a journalist, where she's a social media coordinator, but also writes a lot. So she's a producer, running social media channels, interviewing players, writing stories, also appears on camera. That's like 5 jobs in one. And I said to her, is it challenging to almost be a Swiss Army knife? But she also has to have some sort of appreciation, right? I enjoy writing. I enjoy play-by-play broadcasting. I have a love for telling people stories, whether it's verbal or written, but also I love behind the scenes tweeting, coming up with ideas of, a story idea, whether it's done by me or someone else, whether it's a promo or something along the lines of that. So I think you have to almost go back to, the main point, be a Swiss Army knife in this business to have some sort of just love for it, but also figure out, maybe I don't like doing interviews, or I really love doing interviews. You have to kind of test it out so you can figure out yourself, all right, I like this, I don't like that. How can I get better at this? It's all works. It's weird. The sports industry is like a big family. Some are distant cousins, but some are brother and sister. So you have to kind of figure out what I like, what I don't like, what I love to do, what I don't like to do.
And speaking of your poster in your background of Kauffman Stadium, the home of the Kansas City Royals, you are the play-by-play broadcaster and writer for the Burlington Royals, the minor league affiliate of the Kansas City Royals. Can you just talk about how that opportunity came about and what excites you about this opportunity, other than the fact that hopefully we get to baseball, live baseball very soon?
I don't think I've ever told this story yet, but I asked someone for a piece of advice, and they told me to play the numbers game. And I thought nothing of it. I thought everything of it, actually. And I took that to heart. And, this person told me, apply to everywhere where you would want to apply to. And I said, okay. So, it's funny because the Bay Sox were my ultimate fallback option, but it turns out that they weren't going to have a season in 2020 anyways. The team took a year off, and they have hopes to come back in the NACBL next year. And I applied to some Cape Cod teams. I applied to a couple teams in the NACBL, and I got, we're good. Thanks for the, info. We're all set. We have, and I said, okay, fine. No worries at all. That, I had one team that said, oh, we found our fit for, a broadcaster, but would you be interested in doing half of our home games as a sideline reporter? And I'm like, well, I appreciate the offer, but it was actually right after I accepted the position in Burlington. But I'm like, I'm okay. I'm content with where I'm at right now. But I sent an email to every single minor league baseball team that exists. And Burlington just happened to be, the GM of that team, Mikey Morrison, responded within 2 minutes. He said, send me your resume. So I did. And then he said, send me your reel. And I did. And he goes, can you do a phone interview tomorrow at 2? And I said, sure. And I reached out to someone for a piece of advice for my first interview with a minor league team. They gave me some advice. And I did the phone interview with Mikey on Tuesday. We ended the interview. And I asked them, what's the application process like? When should I find out? Because I would like to know. It was right before I went back for the spring semester of college. And, I would like to know, some sort of, idea of when I should know in case I need to look for, if that didn't work out or something like that. And he said, oh, you should know, next 2 weeks. Well, I got a phone call 30 minutes after the phone interview, and he offered me the job. And I said, okay, can I get back to you by 5 that day? Now, obviously, in my head, I'm saying yes, but also this is my first time, or it's a minor league baseball job. And the first people, I went downstairs and I asked my parents, I said, so Burlington, North Carolina, is it okay for me to go down there and spend the summer down there? And my dad was like, yeah. So right after I ended that phone call, I ended up calling Mikey and said, I accept. And ever since then, I've been with a team, and I'm still working, with them doing these Burlington Royals spotlights now, which are fun to do. It's just 10, 15-minute interviews with past players of the B Royals. And, I've been able to talk with so many fun guys, to talk with Noah Murdoch, who pitched for the team last summer. And then Tyler Zuber, who pitched phenomenal in spring training and is hoping to finally get the call up to the major league level. Or if it's Tony Pena Jr., who is supposedly to be the manager this summer, hopefully. So Tony Pena Jr., we had him on a couple weeks ago. And then the first guest we had on was Bobby Witt Jr., a lot of juniors. Bobby Witt Jr., who was the second overall draft pick for the Kansas City Royals last year in the MLB draft. So it's getting the opportunity to really get to know these players as people, right? So I think that's a big key piece to it, to where how can I still get reps? How can I still, stay relevant? And how can I still get to know these people as people, even if it's not face-to-face?
And last question for you, Alex, and it has to do with something that you just talked about, and that's this whole concept of persistence as a broadcaster. For many broadcasters, the idea of sending your demo reel out to as many places like you did is common. But I feel like a lot of young broadcasters may get discouraged by the first few no's or the non-replies, the emails, etc. How important is it as a broadcaster to continue to have that persistence, continue to have that self-initiative and drive to keep going? Because eventually, like you, the opportunity might be just around the corner.
It's everything. And I would tell you that I've been lucky with, I think, acquiring that skill at an early age. And I think it's basically because of hearing the no's that have helped me acquire that skill throughout the years, right? Where if it was reaching out to someone 4 or 5 years ago about an interview on a podcast, and then learning persistence is key to everything, no matter what field you're in. But if a lot of times, oh, I'm busy right now, follow up in 6 months and we'll do it then. I always write a note. I don't have the paper in front of me, but I have a piece of loose leaf paper of, on one side, people I want to interview, and on the other side, someone I've interviewed before that I would love to interview again, whenever that would be. And I always make sure to note, okay, follow up in July of 2020, right? Mm-hmm. So learning how to stay persistent. If someone tells you, I would love to, but I'm busy right now, follow up in 6 months, they mean that. And if you follow up with them in that 6 months time frame, you have a much higher chance to get them on if you follow up 2 years down the line. So I think it's figuring out the persistence of it, figuring out, okay, this is how I can be successful, and to knowing when to reach out to someone is also a major piece as well. So it's all about also, it's not that the no's or the no responses motivates me, but at the same time, it's like, okay, how can I get better so that someone says yes? What am I not doing well enough for someone to say yes? So I think that's another big piece of it too. You have to kind of understand where that person is coming from, whether it's just simply they don't have enough time, or maybe I'm not that good of an interviewer as I might have thought I was. Maybe I do need to improve and work on my skills before I interview them. So there's so many different pieces that can kind of go into it, but I think that would be the big piece of it, knowing, okay, maybe this is the way to do it, but to also don't stop at a no. And to also not be afraid of reaching out to someone and hearing the word no or not response. So I think that's the biggest piece of advice that I could give to someone. Don't be afraid of hearing the word no or nothing. You have nothing to lose.
Mhm.
So I think at the same time, you have to just know nothing is going to hurt me by reaching out to someone, whether it's advice, a job, an opportunity, um, an interview, whatever it may be. Reach out to them, and you never know what can happen.
Alex Feuz, he's the play-by-play broadcaster of the Burlington Royals and the host of the Whole Story podcast. Alex, thank you so much for coming on the Weesports Quarantine Chronicles.
Thank you for having me, Lucas. It was a lot of fun.